All right, let's see what else we can discuss. Let's go into the topic of Sean Fain and the UAWs discussion of Martin Luther King Jr., um, who we celebrate on the 15th, so in 5 days. I'm going to read this short thread from the UAW, which comes from a Sean Fain article. It says the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the greatest labor leaders in our country's history. Right off the bat, this is extremely important because people tend to think of MLK and the Black Freedom Movement that he headed and that gave us the Civil Rights Revolution of 1964, forever changing the Constitution and the social consciousness of the American people. People tend to think about those things in a very race reductive fashion. And that's not to say that, the struggle against racism isn't a determinate form of class struggles, but it was, very clearly a class struggle when you see the rootedness it had in the working class movement, how it changed a sort of outright fascism that existed specifically in the U.S. South, and how it improved the lives of working people, how deeply it was rooted in major unions which backed it, and labor struggles which they participated in, and specifically in the U.S. South, which was the part of the country that was most hostile to labor. So it's a working class movement through and through. Don't let anyone fool you. Yes, it has some bourgeois elements, but those were secondary. The heart and soul of the civil rights movement was working class through and through, and it was led, as was the Second American Revolution in 1865, by the black proletariat, the section of the proletariat that has historically been the most progressive for the reasons we enunciated earlier from Marx. It's been the section of the proletariat that has bared the most brunts from society and that has had to keep its chin up and fight back with dignity for democracy and freedom and these values that are never realized for working people. Now I think because of 1964, we're at a different situation, and a lot of the brunts have become universalized. You look at the drug epidemics and the zombie neighborhoods. Now they're not just in black neighborhoods; they're in white neighborhoods as well. You look at the problem of debt; it's basically universal in the working class. You look at the inability of people to pay the basic necessities that they need at the end of the month. Again, it's basically universal in the working class. So in many ways, the white proletariat, in terms of material conditions, is as similar as it's been with the black proletariat as ever, and that creates, along with this transformation of social consciousness brought forth by the Civil Rights Revolution, the most fertile conditions for a united class struggle. Because the public and psychological wages that Du Bois talked about as the material foundation that allows for racist false consciousness, they've been completely, or not completely, but largely removed. And if you're interested in that, I'll link a paper that I did for the Journal of Labor and Society, peer-reviewed academic article, where I described that in the process of talking about the importance of W.E.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction as the foundational text for American Marxism. But we'll keep this going. He was not president of any union, but the struggle for economic justice on and off the job was a core, undeniable part of historian vision. I see King, again, this is Sean Fain, the leader of the UAW, as a direct inspiration and guiding light of the 21st century union movement. That's huge, it's so easy for many on the left, specifically the ultra left, to just downgrade King. If you're not seeing the immensity of King in American history and for today, the relevance of King's thought for today, his ability to connect, the international situation to the national situation, the Black Freedom Movement to the general struggle of the working class, his ability to root it in a way that's, centered in the traditions of the United States and the various struggles and progressive fights and thought that has been created over the course of our history of the process of the American people becoming a people. If you can't see that, you're going to have a very hard time succeeding in a revolutionary struggle and winning your people over in the U.S. But as we gather next week to commemorate his life, mission, and legacy, I'm struck by how intertwined his movement and the labor movement remain decades later. That's Beautifully said. I see the echoes of King everywhere I go, not just in the UAW Solidarity House where he penned an early draft of his I Have a Dream speech, but across the country, and particularly in the South, where he called home. My mind is on the South a lot these days, as thousands of non-union auto workers concentrated in South Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky have just launched their own movement for economic justice. These workers are taking action, signing union cards and launching public campaigns to win the economic justice they've just seen auto workers win in the Detroit 3. In other ways, I'd like to think King would find this movement deeply familiar. He was no stranger to the fight for workers' rights. In fact, it was him who said all labor has dignity. I think it was also Abraham Lincoln, by the way. And he was no stranger to the strike, as his final campaign was the Memphis sanitation worker strike. That's what got him killed. It is the process of learning from one another and marching side by side that marks the meaning of Martin Luther King Jr. Day for our union and our movement. I don't think it's a coincidence that our 21st century movement for Southern workers' rights has found its first home in Tennessee, the same state where King's fight left off. It is also not a coincidence that our new auto industry has migrated to Alabama, where thousands of workers are standing up at Mercedes, Hyundai, Toyota, Honda, and Mazda. By the way, this is an extremely important point because it sees, that which Benjamin called the angel of history, the way in which people's struggles are. Here's where I disagree with Benjamin. They are, yes, of course, looking at the future, but they're also looking at the past. They're looking at those who waged struggles and fought and died, as in the case of King. Lost job opportunities, were tortured, a million things happened to them. A million sacrifices were made in order to push the struggle forward. And we can't let those die in vain. How can we live with ourselves if we don't advance the class struggle, if we don't redeem those that came before us? We're redeeming the struggles of oppressed and exploited people in this movement. And when the UAW raises the struggles that it's doing in these various parts of the country as a continuation of Dr. King's legacy, it's doing precisely that act of redeeming and carrying forth the struggle. In many ways, it is allowing King to constantly resurrect. King and with King, the civil rights movement and the Black freedom movement that, really that he was the head of for a period of time. And now the soul of the state was, in some ways, King's most iconic battlefield, from the Montgomery bus boycott to Selma's Bloody Sunday. It is the same domain of anti-worker politicians and those who would stoke racial division that America's 21st century auto workers must struggle on to achieve their fair share of economic justice. So again, very clear understanding here of the class struggle and how racism is a tool of the capitalist class to divide working people. As we are approaching a century since King's birth and 90 years since the UAW's birth, it is no coincidence that our struggles remain intertwined. This is historic, man. One of the flaws that the labor movement has had has been that it's often been divided from the general struggle of the Black freedom movement, which has been, as we often say here, following Du Bois and Winston, the nucleus of the class struggle, the determinate form that the class struggle has taken here in the U.S., led by the Black proletariat. But now we have a UAW that is seeing itself as being in the legacy of King and the Black freedom movement, and that when it speaks about international issues, it connects it deeply to the struggle of working people here at home, as it's done in its more than a month long now call for a ceasefire. And as far as I know, I haven't seen them endorse the Democrats yet, which is sort of the archetype of the labor movement way to go in politics. Just tail the Democrats who claim that they'll give them some crumbs. So it's, again, the more I see Shawn Fain, the more excited I get. And if there was a New Year's wish that I can hope to have realized, is that there's some effort at turning this currently economic struggle into a political one. I'd love to see, a labor party, a people's party grow out of these movements. And they're going to have to realize that with what we have at the level of politics right now, these two bourgeois parties, we're going to get nothing done. We need a people's party, and it has to be situated in the labor movement. It has to be situated in the struggle of the Black freedom movement, and in these progressive struggles that can only realize the things that they're aiming for in a radically new society. So, something like a Sean Fain, Chris Smalls ticket for maybe not 2024, it's too soon, but for 2028 would be pretty darn cool. But again, local politics is also essential. So getting a Labor Party up and running for various positions around the country would be pretty badass. In connection to that, I also wanted to pull up a quote from MLK that they shared. They're also calling, as Nico mentions here, for a general strike by, I believe, 2027, 2028, to have all of the unions align the ending of their contract in May 1st so that they can do a general strike that lines up with Labor Day. Not Labor Day, International Workers' Day. Here's a quote from MLK that the UAW shared. The labor movement was the principal force that transformed misery and despair into hope and progress. That is, again, so essential. So many people say, well, capitalism has given us this, capitalism has given us that. Capitalists haven't given us shit. Everything, the small bits of fucking enjoyment that we have, it's been won by working people's struggles, often led by communists and socialists, as MLK was. So beautiful, beautiful quote. And this other one I wanted to pull up as well here is from a speech that MLK gave, quoted by the New York Times many, many years ago. The security we profess to seek and foreign adventures we will lose in our decaying cities. The bombs in Vietnam explode at home. They destroy the dream and possibility of a decent America. That couldn't be more important to blast, to proliferate in today's world. A world in which the republic is falling apart and it's getting sucked dry by the empire, as Parenti would say. We have no money to clean up our streets, to raise the living standards of our people, to have wages that allow us to not be concerned with whether we'll be able to pay for the bills at the end of the month. We have no money for removing the crippling debt that people have for wanting to get an education, for wanting to have a house, for wanting to have an automobile that they're able to get to work in safely. We have no money for rebuilding our infrastructure. We have no money for, guaranteeing a nationalized health service for our people so that 45,000 don't die a year from the lack of insurance. We have no money for anything that has to do with the American people. But we have all the money in the world so that the small monopoly capitalist class that governs our state, that makes our state be a committee for its interest, for its class interest. We always have money so that the affairs that class wants to excite around the world, the wars that it wants to produce and carry forth, threatening millions of lives of our brothers and sisters abroad, but also of our brothers and sisters at home. We always have money for that. There's always money for war. There's always money for drone strikes. There's always money to give billions and billions to neo-Nazis in Ukraine, to give billions and billions to Nazis in Israel. We always have money for that. There's always money for war. And the reality is, as is very eloquently and poetically said here by King, those bombs that we drop abroad, they drop at home. Our cities are crumbling. And it is not a disconnected set of facts. What we're doing abroad is deeply connected to the misery that our people are suffering at home. And the only way to end both the extreme evil that we produce around the world and the misery that our people have at home is with people's movements rising up and taking power taking power away from this parasitic, big monopoly capitalist class and putting power in the hands of working people so that the state, the economy, civil society, and all the institutions in it, education, media, etc., so that it all works for the sake of human beings and not for the sake of the capital accumulation of a small parasitic class.